Good morning, everybody. We've already started in a way with our pre-meeting conversation about how much we're looking forward to Jim's second presentation about the process model and how interesting people found the first one and the recordings of it. So I would recommend that you, even if you were there for the first one, that you listen to both of them as a companion pieces. So welcome, Jim. Welcome, everybody. Really, really looking forward to this. I love when we make theory a living thing, and I said that the wrong way. When we are aware of the living quality of theory and we enjoy swimming around in it and allowing it to touch us. And I think that's what we're going to be doing this morning. So Katerina is going to welcome Jim and introduce Jim, and then we're going to get started.
So Jim Baumbach has come back by popular demand to do a part 2 of his special way of bringing Gendlin's a process model. Somebody said earlier that Jim connects all the tangents. Is that what you said? Yes. So let's listen to you, Jim. Thank you.
Okay, so I had hoped to do everything in part 1, but that never works. And when the time ran out, I discovered that I went through about a third of my notes. So now I'm going to do the other 2/3. And I call this a remedial course because remedial comes from remedy. And I'm trying to remedy something that people have a very difficult relationship with a process model. People start it and get stuck, or they give up, or they're terrified of it. And in case you didn't read today's title and everything, I should tell you what a process model is. It's a book that Gendlin wrote in 1997, and there's a second edition in 2017, which has some of the same typos of the 1997 book, but that's a different story. So I will try and answer all your questions, not necessarily correctly. And I want to also say why or why not to read it in the first place, and the second place, and so on. Okay. So, and if there's anything I say that you don't understand, please interrupt me and ask. So how many of you have started a process model since part 1? Since I inspired you? I don't see many hands raised. Okay. So a process model is very organized, and in trying to organize what I can say about it in part 2, I experienced how hard it is to organize this material. There's just so much, and it's hard to figure out what to put in and leave out, and how to do transitions. Transitions are especially hard. So I might do some transitions that don't make any sense. So stop me and I'll try and make sense out of them. And I'm sure there's parts I'm still going to leave out, but I don't want to do a part 3. So at least not for a few weeks or a few years. Okay, so let me recap the last episode in case you were not there. The last time I told you what a model was, and what a process was, and what was, and what the letters APM stood for. APM is the short form of a process model. And if you weren't here last time, in brief, APM is the way people who want to sound like they know what they're talking about refer to a process model. A model is a conceptual, symbolic way of understanding. And a model is about the thing to be understood. A model is not the thing itself, but it's about it. And in a process model, the ability to understand the aboutness is what distinguishes humans from non-human animals. And I mentioned that last time. I had to listen to the recording of last times to make sure I don't say the same things twice. But I still will say the same things twice. But I also said last time that when you say the same thing over again, it's different than the first time. That it's impossible to repeat things.
Oh my, might you pause for a moment, please, so we can take all that in?
Okay.
I love that last sentence about you can't repeat yourself. That's beautiful. Very reassuring for those of us who do talks.
So last time we talked about what a model is, and we discussed different models that we used and how they tend to be invisible to us, especially when they're working well. And we talked about how we need models. That's the only handle we have on what's being modeled. Now, APM is cognitive, needs to be thought about, which means it's for humans to read. Because until you reach chapter 7 of a process model, you can't use language. So those beings who are covered in chapters 1 through 6 don't get to read it. And it takes a lot of work to read it and understand it. It's the kind of work many of us don't like to do or don't understand how to do. And it's the kind of work that's like thinking at the edge. And the edge is not a cozy place to hang out. But it's where we have to spend a lot of time with the process model, which is one reason people might give up reading it, because they feel uncomfortable at the edge. And it's the same reason our clients don't change as quickly as we might like, because you have to give up the comfortable place where you hang out and go somewhere new. So any questions so far? I don't know if it's good or bad that there aren't any, but
I just love, Jim, that whole idea of hanging out with your clients. What makes it difficult is that you have to go somewhere new. I just wanted to emphasize that because you saying it just helped to hear it again. It's like a truth, like an underground truth, but like you actually voicing it is very helpful to me.
like, I think that when they go into therapy, they tell this story and they think that the story is the whole story. But if it were the whole story, then they move on from there. Story is usually where people get stuck. And we find ourselves stuck in various ways all the time, and we have to leave the old stories behind. And the process model is a model, a new model. Well, it's not that new anymore, but it's new insofar as it's different from the unit model, which is the model most of us use most of the time. Now, I say that in the focusing world, the cognitive is often avoided or minimized because people think that the way to get away from the story, to get away from the past, is to stop thinking. But that's not true. But Gendlin says, and don't ask me where he says this, I think it's on a Not a Lou video. He says, if you really believe a theory, then it's wrong. If you have many theories and they disagree, then you're all right. And then he adds, if the parents disagree, the child is free. But if the parents disagree, it could also mean that no one's taking care of you. So, and if you have no model or theory, how can you live? Now, keep in mind that it sounds like Gene is being dismissive of theory, but keep in mind he taught a course in theory creation. He was not against theory. And APM is all theory.
I just want to say that quote was in his video that he made right here about theory for focusing oriented therapy, and it's the only presentation that we have that was very specifically about therapy theory.
Well, it's true about theory in general.
Mm.
And I'm using the term theory, and in the past we used the term model. So what's the difference between a theory and a model? Well, Wikipedia says that a theory is a model that's true. But Wikipedia is wrong about that. At least that's my theory. Because what is true? In fact, no model or no theory can be true. And then this is what Gene is saying earlier, because what you can say in words is very limited. It always leaves things out. And we like to talk about not knowing, but that's not the same thing as having no models. If you had no models, it would be like living like my cat, which is okay. My cat has a pretty good life. And but I think most of us would prefer to be humans most of the time, not all the time. I think when my cat is being pet, I prefer to be the cat. So I want to emphasize that models are a comfort and they make us feel secure, like we know what's going on and perhaps have some control over it, which is why when we lose our models, it's a source of discomfort or anxiety. And changing models, which is what APM is about, it's about moving from the unit model to a process model. Changing models is called a paradigm shift, which is a term invented by Thomas Kuhn, who invented the term in his book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which came out in 1962. And even as we say this, I'll bet you Katerina is looking it up and is going to put it in the chat. Is that true, Katerina? She probably can't hear me. She's busy looking it up and putting it in the chat.
Yeah, yes, I'll do that.
And in this book, he says that old science can't change until those holding the old models die off. That this is how attached we are to our models, that the only way to get rid of them is to die. But we're hoping to do better than that, because dying is kind of drastic, in my opinion. So we know what a model is, and we know what a process is a little bit less. So let me say more about processes before we go on.
Jim, could you just say what the difference is between a theory and a model from your point of view? Because we didn't agree with Wikipedia, but we might agree with you.
Oh, I like to say that a theory is a model with delusions of grandeur. But what a theory is, like, you have to use language to talk about things. And sometimes we talk about things in a way that's kind of vague and we're kind of discussing it and waving our hands. But sometimes we talk about it as if this is the real thing. Like there are real electrons and they're flowing through wires and that's actually happening. And I'm not saying that it's not happening, but electrons is something we've made up. No one's ever held an electron in their hand and looked at it. This is stuff that's modeled through different experiments and theories. The actual experience of what's going on in the world has to be said in language, and the language is always an approximation. It's always an abstraction. So you never really get to something that's true. You get to something, it's like the handle of a felt sense. The felt sense is the actuality. The handle is a way to kind of point to it. It's a way to keep it from running away from you.
Mm.
Okay, so I want to say a little bit about processes. I didn't say too much about them last time, except that they go on. But Lynn said something interesting about processes last time. What Lynn said is that they have a thrust, a direction, that they're going somewhere. And so I would like to have a mini attunement right now where we can see if we can feel that thrust in ourselves. So let's pause right now and see if we can feel this thrust, this process in us having a direction. So kind of relax and get into your body and see if you can find that thrust. I'm going to do it too right now. Okay, so I can feel it. Does everybody here feel that direction, that thrust in you? Anybody here who can't feel it?
If I understand what you're talking about, Jim, which would be miraculous, given the diversity of understanding. What I understand from your question was my trust, THRUST, yeah?
Thrust, TH,
Yeah.
correct.
Was towards understanding some of what you said. So that's what my thrust was. Have I understood? Yeah.
Well, that is one kind of thrust. They're
Yeah.
all, the thing is that you're never without a thrust.
Mm.
Always there. There's always a direction. There's always an implying, which is a term Gene uses, that processes are always implying. There's always something that follows. There's always the next step, and it's being implied. And the term implying is a big word in a process model. And the term implying means many, many things. And it's that direction that makes it different from a unit model. In a unit model, things just sit there. You go into the lab and it's sitting there and you do things to it, you poke at it. But in the process world, things are always changing, things are always moving. In fact, that's the difference between thinking in process terms than in unit terms, that in a process model, there aren't things that just sit there. Change is what you start with. If you want something to sit still, you have to go out of your way for it. In fact, in a process model, there aren't objects, there aren't things until we get to chapter 4. In the first 3 chapters, everything's just flowing along process-wise. And in chapter 4, the first way an object exists is because you want something, or a process needs something to continue, and that something is not there. It's in its absence that the first object comes into existence. And it's almost, it's not changing because it's absent. If something is present, it's going to be changing, but something that's absent can be not changing. Later on, we in a process model, we can have objects that are there, but initially the first object is not there. So we talked about processes implying, and when the thing that's implied occurs, he calls that carrying forward. Now, words like implying and carrying forward, these are old words. We've all heard them before we learned anything about processes. So these are old words that are used in a new way. And that's part of the difficulty of a process model is Gene is trying to say something new, but the old words kind of force you to say old things. So he starts using the words in strange new ways. And he has them mean different things than they meant when you started out. We don't have the language to construct APM, so we have to use the one we're stuck with. So we have to use it in a funny way. So in other words, in order to understand what we're reading in a process model, we have to already understand all sorts of things. So you have to understand in advance what you have to understand. So it's circular. This kind of circle is called a hermeneutic circle. And I mentioned that not because you're required to know this for the final exam, but because it's not a term that Gene uses anywhere that I've seen. It's just to point out that this kind of concept has been out there for a long time. It's not something new. So how do we do that? How is it possible to understand something in advance of your understanding of it? Could anybody do that? And the answer is, well, we've all done that, because when we were born, we were thrust, to use that word, into the world. Heidegger prefers thrown into the world. And people started talking to us as if we'd understand. Your mother would say, oh, are you hungry, or something like that? And we have no idea what she's talking about. But eventually they talk to us as if we know what they're talking about. We kind of join in and understand what they're talking about. So that's the same kind of process, to reuse that term, but is how one has to read a process model. You have to go in there not knowing what's going on, and eventually you have to hope that you will. And if you give up hope, then you stop. And that's why a lot of people stop. They've given up hope.
Speaking of hope, can I ask something?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm sitting here and thinking and feeling into everything you're saying. And what comes to me is that, tell me if you disagree. I think people often seek stability. Backing up a second, I'm thinking, why are we stuck with the unit model, or why is the unit model the default? And then we have to go through all this stuff to understand that there are processes. So what occurs is that people seek stability. And you don't want to think when you're a little kid that your mother is changing every second. You kind of want to feel that there's the same mother. You kind of want to feel that your room is your room and you can count on it. And you could say that the unit model, just as the Buddhists talk about the ego, or what, that it's an illusion, right? You could say that it's all an illusion, but it's an illusion for a reason. It's an illusion because we want to feel safe. We want to feel that when we put our feet down on the floor, there's going to be a floor there. So the process model is up against something very seriously important, which is either stability or the illusion of stability. So I don't know. I could ask a question in all kinds of different ways. I could say, why go there? It's only going to lead you to a lot of anxiety. Just
Yeah,
as a lot of people meditate, and it causes them great anxiety. It's not necessarily, something that people seek out. And in
yes,
fact, now there's all this literature about, meditation and, yeah, a lot of people actually get very anxious and it might not be that good for them. So that's my basic question. I understand why we want to widen things to the process model and that we're stuck in the unit model. But it's sort of like when you are in therapy, you have this idea that you'll feel better if you open up, but it's also really scary.
that's right. And that's why people don't change.
And why should we? Because there's a greater truth that we should want to get to, or what's
Well,
in it for us?
people go into therapy and don't say, well, some don't say, I can't go on like this any longer.
Hmm.
Uh, People recognize the value of change. Stability has a comfort to it, but you also don't want to eat the same meal every day either. Well, most of us don't at any rate. Even my cat doesn't want to eat the same meal every day.
Especially your cat.
Right. So, I mean, there's change and then there's lack of change. Uh, and there's a place for both.
I think one of the big turning points is when the security that we get from stability, things being the same, can be helped by faith in this thrust. And I think that that's what spirituality is, and that's what many kinds of theory are trying to give us, this faith that change is a kind of opening up, a kind of development. And it's hard to trust that.
Yes, I totally agree that change can be scary and it requires a certain kind of faith. And there's going to be change anyway. It's not like it can be avoided. You can't decide at the age of 7, this is as old as I plan on getting, because otherwise, on your 8th birthday, you'll have to argue and say, no, I'm still 7. And no one's going to believe you. Well, I don't know if that particular anecdote is the way it would take place, but we're growing, hopefully, and not growing is not considered a good thing. In fact,
Many kids do that too. There's such a wide range, if you're familiar with that. Many kids say, I don't want to be 6,
right,
and then other kids say, I'm going to be 6.
yeah. And it's interesting because I remember Freud says somewhere that children all rather be grown-ups, that they're all waiting to be grown-ups. And I said, I wasn't like that when I was a kid. So okay, so APM starts with the following line. I shall lay down some terms as if they came out of nowhere. So even Gene, in writing a process model, knows that we need a new language. And he's kind of warning us right there in the first line. Or maybe warning is too negative a term. He's offering us. Okay. So, as I said, as kids, this is how we learned about the world. It was kind of spoken to us as if we already understood. And then later we joined in and understood. Does that remember anybody here remember what that was actually like, what that felt like growing up? No. Well, I certainly don't. But if you want to remember what it's like, that's one reason to read a process model, because you get that same feeling of what's going on here? What is he talking about? Uh, uh, and of course, as a kid, you didn't really have that much choice about whether you're going to learn a language or not. There are people who never learn to speak or resist learning to speak. And I can appreciate that point of view. It's the wish not to change, the wish not to become part of things. And what Lynn says about his faith is true, that in order to grow, in order to have your process carry forward, you need some kind of faith that it's going to be all right, that you're going to survive it in some way. And you need the same kind of faith to read a process model, that there's something that you're going to get out of it, that you're going to understand it. So why was the process model written in the first place? And Ruth?
Yeah, I just want to say we might not have it. My experience is we might not have it with language, but at least in my life, I have this experience of newness or a cultural difference. In like my friends are not part of one circle. There are living in Jerusalem, they're the more religious, they're the non-religious, they're the straight, they're the gay, and then just now I was just abroad in Holland, and there was that community, and then there was the European focusing gathering where everybody came, and some of us were familiar with European focusing, but it's a different group. Every year it's a different group, and so there's always that, well, for me, a fear and the discomfort that then somehow becomes like bathwater or comfortable to me. So does that, because you said we don't have that experience that we did as a child with that newness of the concepts that we live by that make our life comfortable in our little Dalit mode, we say in the Jewish thing, in our whatever, our little life, that there are many times we go to a new group and there's a sense of the old concepts might not fit. And
A lot of controversy results because one group wants to hold on to their point of view, and then there's another group that has a different point of view, and they're each saying, I'm right, and the other group says, no, I'm right. So
it might not be about rightness, it's different cultures are different.
the words they use are I'm right, that they feel right. I mean, a lot of controversy out in the world is because people think that they know how things are and other people don't. And so they have to impress their way on other people.
Right. Anyway, thank you.
And this is in contrast to some idea that we're all in it together and we're all similar in some more basic way, and that the differences are more superficial.
Yeah.
Gene wrote a paper called Two Phenomenologists Do Not Disagree. And the idea in this paper is that if you're dealing on the level of phenomena, experience, how you understand what's happening in the world without putting your concepts on it, that a disagreement cannot occur. Because disagreements are always on the symbolic level. They're always on the level of, no, it's this way. No, it's that other way. That as we experience it, we just experience it. We can't argue about it. It's what's happening to us or for us, depending on
We shouldn't, but we do.
So I was asking why Gene wrote APM in the first place. And the answer is because the unit model fails to account for certain things, and they become add-ons. Like in the unit model world, when we talk about meaning or values or something like that, there's always something added on, something to be argued about. Where do values come from? Can we do an experiment and figure out what the values are? And you can't do such an experiment because you can only get values from values. You can't get them. I think the philosophical phrase is you can't derive ought from is. You can't get values out of a unit model. So Gene said, well, we can have a model that has them built in. And so how could he build in values? How can he build in these things that are left out? How can he build a thrust into the model? And the answer is with implying. And right off in chapter 1, we learned about implying. There's all different kinds of implying. There's the implying of a process moving forward, and there's implying of connection that the beginning of a process model, he's laying down his terms, which he says, I'm going to lay down these terms as if they come from nowhere. He starts with body and environment. And body and environment are both words we're all familiar with. So they're old words, but he's going to be using them in a totally new way. And I don't know if you remember last week when Abby was here, she talked about body and environment, and she wrote B-EN. And she didn't say where that came from. That's the way Gene writes about body and environment in the process model. He writes B-EN. And he talks about different types of environments. He talks about, and he numbers them. He talks about environment 1 and environment 2 and environment 3 and environment 0. And the reason he's doing this, well, let's skip the reason for a while and talk about what they are. That environment 1 is what he calls the spectator's environment. And like if you see an animal in its habitat, the habitat is the environment for that animal. All right. But then he talks about environment 2. Now, environment 2 is the directly experienced environment that we're part of and we participate in. And the example he gives to start off with is when we breathe, we can feel the air going into our lungs and the lungs expanding. When we walk, we can feel our feet walking on the ground and the ground pushing up on one's feet. But then he says, after this, he says that body and environment, and he's meaning environment 2 here, body and environment are the same thing. They're one. And so we don't give up right then and say, what do you mean? We have different words, different things. He says, in certain respects, he adds that. So, but I mean, if we're talking about why it's difficult to understand reading a process model, this is one of the reasons, at least it was for me. When I first saw that, I said, well, yeah, it makes some kind of sense. But why is he starting there? It seems to be a strange place to start a book on philosophy. So those of you who started a process model and gave up, how many people had difficulty with body and environment being one? Only one. Everybody else was just, well, of course. Well, why do we use different words for them then? Well, the body and environment, which are different, are thing body and thing environment, but he's talking about a process. And this is why our process model is about processes, that the process of air going into our lungs and the lungs expanding is one process. You can't have the lungs expanding without the air going into them. You can't have the air going into them without them expanding. This is a single process. So if you're thinking in terms of processes, then they're one. Similarly with walking, you can't walk, you can't press your feet on the ground without the ground pressing up on your feet. It's not something you can do. This is the process of walking. It's not, we tend to think of things as separate from each other, and then wonder how they get together. So
Jim,
do another little micro attunement here.
Jim,
I
I'm
think
sorry.
we-
Could I ask a question? Something that you just said. So did you just say that this whole thing about environment and the feeling as one, that I think you were in environment too, right? Did you
Yeah.
say that the reason why we didn't raise our hands and is because we feel it as a process? Is that what you said?
Well, I
That
don't
we feel this environment because we understand it as a process, that we are totally in it?
Yes. But
Okay, thank
you're
you.
one as a process. What I wanted now is for us to feel it as a process. I want us all to pause and pay attention to our breathing.
Okay.
And feel our lungs expanding. And feel the air going into our bodies. You can feel the air in our noses as it goes in. Or if you're a mouth breather like me, because my nose is always stuffed, you can feel it going into your mouth. And feel it as one process. So let's do that for a moment. Let's see if we can experience that. So how does that feel to people? Anybody want to say? Well,
That feels like a very open question.
yes, it's very open.
I don't even know how to put some words to it in a way.
Well, that's good. You did. Then you just say some old thing that you thought about all along. If you thought from nowhere, then you'll say something new.
I kind of feel a little sensation tingling in my body. It amazes me, like when we're just talking like before, or I'm just listening, I really don't have a sensation of my body. But when you have me pay attention to my breathing, then all of a sudden I feel parts of my body.
Mm.
It feels, I like the feeling. Makes me feel more alive.
I feel complicated about it.
Yes. Can you say
I
more?
only feel it as my body if I really, if I go into the conceptual.
Right.
This is me breathing, but if I don't do that, then I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Well, what you're trying to say is when you go into to the conceptual, then your body becomes a thing, because the conceptual is in the unit model. You're not a process model person. So you're not going to think of the body and environment as one. So if you can think of them as one, then you can be in the conceptual, and the body and environment will be there together, and you can feel your body.
I
But
just wonder why the body is privileged like that in this whole way of thinking about things. You know, what I mean, the environment is everything and big, but why is the body important in a way? Why isn't it mind environment or something like that?
right. Well, to begin with, and this is in fact how we do begin in a process model. It begins with body and environment. And I said, I had the same question. I didn't understand why he was beginning here at all. And if you remember, he says, I'm going to throw out some terms here as if they come from nowhere. So the way of thinking of the environment, you're really thinking of the spectator's environment. You know, you're thinking of this big thing, it's got planets in it and things like that. That's not the environment he's talking about. That's the environment that's been built up conceptually. I mean, in the ancient world, they didn't know about planets and stars and things like that. They saw stars, they thought there were holes in the heavens that allowed the light to shine through. They didn't know there was something out there. And even when I talk about it that way, it's a conceptual construction. It's a theory that the stars are like our sun. And you can say, well, that's a theory that's true, though. The idea of there being holes and the light shining through, that's not true. But no model is true. Models are useful in certain ways and confusing in other ways. There are ways we have a handle on our situation.
But so why the body?
Why not the body?
I don't think that's what Jean would say. Why not the body? I think that it's very important that it's the body.
Well, it is. That's why you wrote it that way.
But I'm asking, what's your thought about why it's so important?
I'd like to stay in here that when we ask that question, why the body, we're assuming this mind-body split. Why not the mind? Why the body? But
Right.
Mhm.
when Gene is talking about the body, he's talking about the mind, body, the you, why you're
Ah,
important.
It's the experience
Ah.
body, not the conceptual body, not the body that you bring to a store when you want to buy clothes.
Oh,
And even the idea that there's that we think with, say, this part of our body and we feel with, you know, other part. I mean, all that is theory that's been added on later. Animals don't know about that. DJ,
Hey Jim, would it be okay if we hear from Forstein?
who?
Could you speak?
oh, Forrestine has her
Oh,
finger up.
I see. But she has to unmute. Otherwise, we won't hear from her.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I think this is why Jean spelled body with a capital B rather than a small b. He was implying this is not the usual physical body that we think about in the conceptual model that Jim is talking about. So capital B, it's to figure out why he capitalized it.
Well, he didn't capitalize it everywhere, but sometimes he did.
But when he talked about it, when, you know, he would often say with a capital B. Right. So that's what we're learning really here. I think, Jeff, you're explaining what that's about. It's the experiential, that which is here that is experiencing all the time. And then we look at that experiencing process. And that's where that, right, the process model came out of that. The real careful look at that from many different angles.
Yes.
Right, not the habitual model, but what are the other possibilities and exploring those?
Well, that's kind of why I gave us all that mini attunement. I wanted us to feel it that way instead of
Right.
the old way.
Yes.
Thank you.
And he also just used a capital B-EN for body environment as a single thing. Again, he's taking old words and using them in a new way.
Jim, this is BJ. I really appreciate what you were saying earlier about thrust and growth. There's a definition of the body in Let Your Body Interpret Your Dreams. And I'd like to read it. It's pretty short. He says, the body is a cosmic system rich in implications and directions beyond just conception. A growth direction is sensed with the body.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that growth conception is what Lynn was calling thrust. And this is the body as sensed, not the body as this thing we bring to the gym to work out. Okay, so let me jump ahead to something from chapter 4. The body environment, as you remember, is all in chapter 1 and in 2 and 3 to some extent as well. But in chapter 4, I'm going to read the actual text here. He says, interaffecting and coordination are words that bring the old assumption of a simple multiplicity, things that exist as themselves and are only then also related. I'm going to read that again. Interaffecting and coordination are words that bring the old assumption of a simple multiplicity, things that exist as themselves and then are only then also related. So we need a phrase that does not make sense in the old way. And let's call the pattern we have been formulating original interaffecting. So the word interaffecting, this only makes sense if one grasps that they interaffect each other before they are a they. It's original interaffecting. They're interaffecting before they're separate things interaffecting. We don't have the words for it. And he calls this original interaffecting. The other term that's similar to this is interaction first. We start an interaction, and the word interaction was two separate things interacting, but it's not meant to be thought of as two separate things interacting, but our words make us think of it that way. Jean wants us to think of them as the interaction comes before they're separate from each other. We can also say that processes are coordinatedly differentiated. They become differentiated in the first place in a coordinated way. But that's backwards. That makes them separate first. Instead, there's the only reason that we think of them as separate at all is because of our language makes us think of it that way. And the unit model makes them think of it that way. Jean wants to think of it all as happening at once, happening all together. And later, if we want to talk about them as a they, we can do that. But it's the theyness that he wants us to be adding on, not their togetherness. We start with the togetherness and then we go to the theyness. Is that clear? Okay, I did a little tricky thing there. in that I jumped from chapter 1 to chapter 4. So am I allowed to do that? Or am I allowed to just say, okay, we're going to chapter 4 now? And if you remember from last time, I talked about Gene's paper on how to read philosophy, and he says many times. So if you can read something many times, and what does it mean to read it many times? Because the many times are not alike. Otherwise, you might as well just read it once. Each time is different because you're reading it in the presence of the previous time, right? So even though I skipped from chapter 1 to chapter 4, we can read chapter 3 later, or chapter 2, or whatever. You can read things out of order, because in order to read a process model, you got to read it several times. You can't just, read it once. Once is not enough. Interaction first is our motto. Right. Okay. So we'll take that as our motto. And in fact, Gene even said to people having trouble reading a process model, maybe you'd like to start in chapter 8. Maybe it'll help you to read chapter 8 first. Now, chapter 8, which is the last chapter, is the focusing chapter. And if you were to have trouble reading a process model and you did skip to chapter 8, you'd probably find chapter 8 easier to read, but only in the beginning of chapter 8. Partially because chapter 8 depends on the previous 7 chapters and refers back to them. And if you didn't read them, well, your next reading, you're going to have to read them, because otherwise you would be able to make sense of things. But the beginning of chapter 8 is very easy for a focuser to read, because it's all about focusing, which is the other reason why Gene wrote a process model. And that is, in the unit model, focusing doesn't make any sense. It's hard to explain what is focusing in the unit model. Well, I mean, people will refer to their body, and they'll refer to their body in the old sense. And it's hard to make focusing fit in to the unit model. And so it's, once again, there's all these things that Gene wants to fit in to a unified field theory, a unified model. He wants to have values fit in. He wants to have implying the thrust fit in, and he wants to have focusing fit in. Like an AI can't focus. An AI can claim to focus, but an AI can't focus. But there's no way to prove that in the unit model. But in the process model, it's obvious that AI can't focus.
I think it would be so interesting to think about what it means if you have a focusing partner, that it's within a process model instead of a unit model, or any relationship, but particularly a focusing relationship. Because as far as I know, and I don't know a lot, but there's not that much written about the focusing partner, the focusing relationship. It's sort of taken for granted that there's this person who's reflecting you and doing something. But, whereas there's a ton written about therapy and that relationship, seems to be very little about, and anyway, I, could go on, which I won't, but do you know what I mean, right?
Yes, I know, but I don't know if it's actually true. Right? I haven't read enough. There might be lots of.
Oh, okay.
I think Katerina put the beginning of chapter 8 in the chat. Is that true?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I should explain something about these chapters, of which there are 8, as I already said. So we have these 8 chapters, and often they're referred to by number. They're referred to by numbers in if you think of the APM community, which is the term that I made up for purposes of saying what I'm saying. The APM community will often talk about the chapter 6 situation or the chapter 8 thing. And in fact, when Neil was here, I guess we scared him away because he didn't come today. But when Neil was here, he gave us this statement that he wanted us to look at to show what a process model was about. And in it, it talks about 7 sequences and 8 sequences, if I remember correctly. And I thought it was unfair of him not to tell us that 7 and 8 are chapters of the process model. So I interrupted and said that then. But this numbering things with chapter numbers is a very process model thing to do. And in fact, it's in the book itself. Yeah, and that statement that Neil gave us to look at is one of those statements about 7 sequences and 8 sequences. In the process model, he will refer to things by chapter. So we can do that too. Because each of these chapters gives us a certain world. And the world that a chapter gives us, you get all the way up to chapter 6. We don't have any language yet in chapter 6. Language doesn't come on the scene until chapter 7. And in fact, not until part B of chapter 7. In part A, Jean is trying to explain how it is that language came into existence and how did symbols come into existence. And as I said in the very beginning, this is aboutness. And we have animals who cannot understand aboutness. And how did they get to the stage where there is an aboutness and they can understand aboutness? And that's what chapter 7 is about. And the first part of chapter 7 is about animal gestures, that animals will say, make a fight gesture toward another animal. And what does that gesture mean? And to say, what does it mean? We're saying it's about something already, because we're looking at it as humans. They're communicating in some way. And what does communicating mean? What is actually going on when an animal makes a gesture? And this is the beginning of the development of language. And by the end of chapter 7, starting with 7b, we have language. And then we get to chapter 8. And Jean wanted chapter 8 not to be called chapter 8. He wanted it to be called chapter 8a. But his publisher said, no, we can't do that. You can't have an 8a without an 8b. And the publisher, like most power situations in the world, won. So
Then why did Gendlin want it to call it A without a B?
Because he wanted, he's trying to develop a analogy between the different phases of development in which there's a pre-language 7a and there's a post-language 7b, and then there's going to be focusing in 8a, and something else is going to be in 8b, but we don't know what else yet. He didn't tell us what else, and nobody else has told us what else.
Thank you for clarifying that.
So he wanted to leave a space for it, a space for an 8b. So in my edition of a process model, because I'm actually, I converted an online version into an ebook. I call it 8A because I'm not bound by the publisher's decision. And now between 8A and 8B, there's something that takes place called the flip. And this is, Gene writes the flip in all caps, capital FLIP. And what is the flip? I'm going to tell you. The flip is the stage where language has taken us over. That we start out, we being living creatures, start out, we don't have any languages. We have gestures, perhaps. And he considers a gesture to be a pause in behavior space. That the gesture is not doing anything to carry the behavior forward. It's doing something else. And what is that else? Well, that else is going to be eventually what concepts and language do. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but when we get, by the time we reach 8B, and we have language, we find we can't go back into behavior space. We're now stuck in symbolic language space because we're now over the flip. This is what he refers to as the flip. And in theory, if there were an 8B, there's something that we start with in focusing. And when we get to 8B, which doesn't exist, we'll be somewhere else where, because in the focusing world, when you focus, you always go back to language. You give things a handle. You're working on some kind of problem in your life, which you initially described linguistically, but you don't stay with that language. You stay with that language, then you're stuck in the story and you can't move forward. So you have to go to the felt sense. You have to experience things and leave that language behind and allow it to shift. But in the end, after it shifts, you're back in language again, and you're back in the language world. So if there were an 8 flip, and nobody knows what that would mean, perhaps you wouldn't have to go back in the language world in that way. Doesn't mean language would cease to exist, but it would cease to exist in that controlling fashion that it does for us now. So do we have any questions about anything I've said so far? And if not, why not?
Well, I got filled up and it's all so interesting, but I couldn't really take in the flip part, and I want to understand that. But I think I need a micro break before I could open up my myself, because I don't want to say my mind, body,
Right.
to understand what the flip is. Maybe we could check with other people if we need like a 3-minute break or something.
What do people think?
Yes, I go with that. I've got the feeling I lose the track. Something in my body can't follow anymore. So I need a kind of feeling, like Lynn said, grounding or whatever we do.
Yeah, there's something that I could feel physically got all filled up, and it's right here, and then it needs a little space before it can have some more room to understand the flip. And I don't want to leave without understanding this flip.
Well, I think that it's good to leave without understanding the flip. And that's what I'd like us to do in our mini break, which we're going to take now. I'd like us all to not understand the flip. I'd like us all to not understand.
We're not going to even think about the flip while we're going to the bathroom.
I don't.
I'm thinking of this as in the force group when we have more process and we don't have structure, and people have become very upset with the lack of structure at times because it's safety, and in the process there's not any safety, I guess. there's not the safety of the structure. And
Right.
that's probably where that discomfort has come from, with the lack of structure.
There's not a fixed kind of safety. You need the faith that the lack of structure is going to be okay.
Mhm. But people fought against it because I don't think they recognized that.
Or
They wanted the safety.
they lack the faith.
Miss you there, by the way.
So people are coming back.
While they're coming back, Jim, can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to thank you for this. I feel like I am experiencing before the flip.
Mhm. Well, you really can't experience before the flip. That's why it's called a flip. The best you can do is experience that there was a flip.
Well, the flip occurs as I needed to express to you what was happening when I was silent. And then I could feel what was needed
Mm.
to communicate. So there was that process from the experiencing into the formulating so that I can convey it and relate. Because I'm not in touch with you physically,
Mm.
whereas I might have been able to join with you without words in your presence, which is what I think someone was actually relating to in the focusing relationship. There's a different kind of field present,
Yes.
and it is that field that I believe is before the flip,
Well,
before one says or even formulates what one is or tries to formulate what one is experiencing.
yes. Except let me say that Gene says the opposite. He says, otherwise you're saying we don't need a chapter 8, you just need to go back to chapter 6. And he says, no, language is built into who we are and you can't get away from it. And that's why it's called a flip, because you can't go back. And in chapter 8, we experience things without language, but the language is there. You can't have focusing. Animals can't focus because they're in behavior space. They're not doing the same thing as a focusing person who already has language. And that's why chapter 8 experiencing is different from chapter 6 experiencing.
I'll have to reread that section. I'm not sure that matches my experience.
Could you say something about your experience for us? So this is a fascinating conversation. I'm sorry that some people are missing it. How you experience it.
There is, in my experience that is before any kind of conceptualization. I was a dancer. I was Jean's focusing partner for a number of years. And during those years, he was writing and developing with Mary and Kai the first sort of languaging of the process model. And I've never really connected this before with my experience as a dancer. But there is non-conceptualization on language as language or as spoken conceptual language. There is a movement into the process of movement. And I think to a large extent, what the process model has pointed to is that silent movement, which is process, ongoing process before conceptualization.
I think for me, it seems like the two of you, Jim and Forresty, are saying the same thing, that there's a difference between language that's inherent, that we're born into, and language that is spoken, conceptual language, so that we're born into language in the sense that we are language in our heritage, and that's a different kind of being languaged than the language that you're talking about, of spoken conceptual language, Forrestine.
Yeah. See, my feeling is we're born into process, not into language. And that the first experience is process. And as a dancer, it is the process that extends and develops.
Mm-hmm.
And within that process is a capacity for language and communication. So that it's process and then communication, which we have this capacity to language what that process is. And language is the development of the communication.
Yes, but well, I guess what I'm trying to say that's different than that, which is not that different in a lot of respects, is that this is happening in a languaged world, that animals may communicate via gesture, but that's very limited. That animals do not communicate by gesture all that much. I mean, and so they don't have language, but in a language world, the way you can communicate without language at all is much richer. And language is present for it, even if it's not going on in you while you're doing it. That is an action, but there's a difference, which is why chapter 8 is different than chapter 6. We're not going backwards, we're going forwards.
Yeah.
But does that mean that process is ever present and much bigger than the language?
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Don't they say that 90% of communication is nonverbal? And then you have all these people that are constantly communicating on the nonverbal channel,
Right.
and not so much on the verbal channel.
And often they don't.
And you gotta go hear that and deal with that, complicated as that is.
We are reading one another's language, silent language, all the time, much like that through the dance. But
Yes.
but we have motion, and we really are communicating all of the time without in a silent way. Language adds a different nuance, or a deeper, well, maybe deeper, but there is a very silent language that's going on in a process way constantly.
I like that, Nancy, that our words are tripping us up. The word language we think of as words, but dance, of course, is a language. And we're always in communication because we are interaction.
Yeah, and what I'm thinking about is that, so we are talking about spoken language, which requires certain level of skills and development in a certain direction, and dance becomes a language. And prior to that, there's something like biological language, like just by being the organisms that we are, things are happening on their own before we can put words to it, before we can even put, the primal instinctual things that happen in us because we become an organism. The original, I mean, Gendlin talks about the intelligence, the biological intelligence, right? So I think we are kind of distilling more and more towards how are we born? The equipment that we already come with. We don't know much about animals, I think, at the sensory level. The amount of things that they have to detect things in the environment, we are very poor as compared to them in that sense. So whereas the dance language may be closer to that than the spoken language, which is totally maybe not true, but we still don't really know what it would be like to have, to go that back in our history.
Yeah. And we have to be a little bit careful about the analogy with dance, because dance also, through different cultures, is shaped in different ways and expresses different levels of things, right? So it's not just that it's the communication, the movement, and the processing as the focus, because that too has been in a way physically conceptualized into cultural dances. So we have to go under that as well. It's sort of an interesting thing for me to think that there's also been a flip in terms of bodily processing and movement. And our cultures do that just as they do it with spoken and written language. It's done also with dance.
You're thinking in terms of a vocabulary of fixed dance steps, like choreography.
Yeah, I'm thinking across cultures, how different dance is expressed, the movement of people is expressed, and to what layer it's formulated and restricted versus there is more individual freedom within the particular cultural style. That there's more of process in the sense of what Jean's talking about in process model. And in our dance, there's much more shaping.
Yeah.
Which is a more, if you want, unit-based kind of dance form.
Yeah, and this is really interesting because what you just said made me think about even baby toddlers, when or as babies begin to stand up the dances that they spontaneously create that involve bending the knees and straightening the knees as aims to stand, because that's what our society does. But, and yeah.
And there are cultures that emphasize that, and the people train the children and hold them and help them bounce up and down like that.
Exactly.
Cultures where the babies sit and something happens in the body, and they're not emphasizing the standing. Okay. I've done a class.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Really
and,
nice.
And maybe that's one of the reasons why so many people, when they go to an improvisation dance class, they are invited to roll on the ground, because apparently a lot of us did not have the freedom to thoroughly enjoy that stage of freedom, connection with the earth, right?
Yes. Yes, that is true. Or the freedom within one's own body to really understand the process and where the process model comes from in terms of body with a capital B.
So whoever was talking about animals, I just want to say that my cat used a gesture with me this morning. She put her paw on my chest. She had been standing beside me because I had not wanted to feed her late at night. So she stood vigil all night long, and she put her paw on my chest, and I said softly no. But then I looked at the clock, and it was exactly the time that I had fed her yesterday. And I'm like, oh my God, you are right. And did she have a model that I would be reliable and consistent and that this is what I wanted? Because she touched me twice. She was insistent until I said no. And she heard the no. And then I was like, oh my God, you are right. I don't know. I'm just saying.
Did you feed her?
Of course. And it was the right time. And I was like, you got it. You know, and she knew. And she has different meows. So she has some kind of sounder, right? But I don't know. I'm just saying, I thought she had a model of what I was supposed to do.
Process model, cats can't have models. That doesn't mean that cats can't communicate. And also, linear time, cats can't have linear time. So did not look at the clock. The clock was helping you. The cat was using a different way of understanding.
Jim, I like what you say about according to a process model, because those of us who have cats might have a whole different understanding than Mr. Gendlin presented in a process model. Yeah.
This has been wonderful, and I think it's time for our poem. I love this conversation.
Yes, it is.
Okay. The poem today is by Adrienne Rich, an American poet from lifetime was 1929 to 2012. And she wrote this poem in 1974. Power. Living in the earth deposits of our history, today a backhoe divulged out of a crumbling flank of earth one bottle, amber, perfect, 100-year-old cure for fever, or melancholy, a tonic for living on this earth in the winters of this climate. Today, I was reading about Madame Curie. She must have known she suffered from radiation sickness, her body bombarded for years by the element she had purified. It seems she denied to the end the source of the cataracts on her eyes, the cracked and suppurating skin of her finger ends, till she could no longer hold a test tube or a pencil. She died a famous woman, denying her wounds came from the same source as her power.
Mm.
Mm.
Mm. Oh. Well, thank you all very, very much. And Jim, I understand the process model so much better